Hi, welcome back to another episode of Coldstream Rod Shop. I'm Derek Fraser. In this week's video, we're going to be working on 32 Roadsters again. The big focus though for me is trying to get the Camera Lady's 32 Roadster body all done up so I can take it off of the frame and put a coat of epoxy primer onto it, because it's been just sitting just a little too long with the flash rust and stuff. There's not a lot left to do for me to get to that stage. One of the things is I want to put the gauge insert in and then cut all the holes for the gauges to make sure that everything fits. The main reason is I have a support piece that goes underneath the dash that I want to make sure clears the ignition switch. And then, like I mentioned at the end of last week's video, I've got a new steering drop that I really think is kind of cool. I want to put this in. And then there's one or two little metal things I'm going to tweak on that I'll talk about later in the video. Also over on Brenda's Roadster, there's a few more things. We've got a few more parts in. The tie rods are in, so I've got to tap those and put them in place. We're going to put some brake lines in, some flex lines on it. Hopefully we got some lug nuts coming in, get the front wheels onto it so it's completely a roller, and then carry this up to the next stage. Also, cross my fingers, I really want to get onto the International Roadster. The deck lid is just sitting here. There's a few other things we want to put in place. This drip rail, it's an original drip rail. I want to try and fix this up, get that in place, get the hinges in, and then there's some lower sheet metal stuff that goes underneath the deck lid that I made up quite a while ago. Get that in there as well and start moving this project along. So stay tuned. It's Roadster, Roadster, or Roadster. First thing we're going to work on this week is the dash for the Camera Lady's Roadster. First thing I did was I made a new mount for the column drop. I've already had it in the car. I'll show you in a few minutes when it gets put back together again. But essentially the column drop will go right there and then hold the steering column in place. The next thing, like I said, I have to do is basically fit the gauge panel I'm going to use into the dash and then make sure I've got clearance for the ignition switch. So I've done a few things already. One of the things I've done with both of my other cars, both the Model A that has a 32 dash and the 32 pickup, which has obviously a 32 dash, I took part of the top of this aluminum gauge panel off. So basically flattened the top off. So cut it with the jigsaw with a aluminum cutting blade, and then went on the belt sander, my stationary belt sander down there, and then smoothed this top piece up so that I can actually move the gauge panel up closer to the top. So I would have done that anyways, but I needed to make sure that this ignition switch, when it was attached, cleared the bottom support that I put on the dash panel. So it actually has plenty of room here right now. I've trial fitted it in place, and what I'm going to do next is I'm going to cut all of these holes out here and then basically put it back in the car. I will weld these corners up to the A-pillars, and then eventually I'm going to weld along the top here as well and weld it to the dash, basically to firm up that whole dash and cowl. So follow along, we are making progress on the Camera Lady's Roadster. There is the dash all welded in place. I've got all the holes cut for the gauges, happy with it. The gauge panel fits quite well. The steering column mount, I have made another little bracket to hang it in place, and it sits exactly where we want it to sit, and it's got a more traditional look instead of the billet kind of hanger that we probably have overused a little bit over the years. Nothing wrong with it, it's just more common. So we're kind of going with a little bit different look on the 32 Roadster here. So columns in, the dash is welded here and then also up along the bottom where the screws would normally be, and that is in there super solid. I also took the opportunity to fix up a couple little defects in the metal, because like you probably know, or those that don't know, this 32 Roadster body was built from Brookville seconds. It was the first one that we did. So there was a few things I was learning as we go, what to fix and what not to fix. There's couple more things I'm gonna have to do on this one. The fit on the door over here by the cowl is a little bit off. So what I'll do at a future point, I'll split this and then I'll bring it in a little bit, and I'll probably build up this edge to basically narrow that gap to make it look a little bit better. We're not going to go for absolute micrometer fit because this is going to be looking like a traditional 32 highboy Roadster. And if you look at any original body, the fits were not great. I mean, we don't want anything ugly. We're just going to kind of make it close and not spend, like, you know, hundreds of hours trying to make everything perfect. So that's it for the welding the dash in. We're going to go on to the next project to move this along. We had a visit this morning from a local YouTube follower who also had a 58 Ford pickup, Kevin Bates. He had these front fenders off of a 58 Ford pickup that came out of Arizona that are in actually quite exceptional shape. There's a couple dents into them, but I mean, the metal is very sound. There's a little surface rust on this fender here, as you can see, but there's no pinholes, there's no breakthrough, there's no nothing. So it's going to be a matter of massaging the dents out and straightening it a little bit, and really no repairs. The passenger side fender, you can see on the bottom there's a little bit of rust, but same thing. Structurally, this fender is exceptionally sound. He gave us a bunch of other little parts that was left over from his project, some odds and ends and some brackets and whatnot. And there's a spare tire holder and some mirrors and stuff that he gave us as well. So, oh, and also a radiator. Now the radiator is leaking, the core is leaking, but the tanks and everything are good. So anyway, really big thank you to Kevin Bates, a YouTube follower here that dropped these parts by to us. Thank you. I decided I was going to work on the International Roadster because it's been sitting here for quite a while. A couple loose ends we had left to take care of, one of which was fitting the deck lid. Now, where I left this one off, and it's quite a ways back, was the deck lid wasn't on and the drip rail wasn't on. So in another episode, I sandblasted an original drip rail. Now, this original drip rail comprises of 3 pieces that were gas welded together. Whoever did a pretty good job. I still kind of had to hammer this edge out straight and remove what was left of the spot welds. The other thing is I have to drill out those holes for right there, for the hinge pin. Done that a few times on previous episodes, but essentially got to measure where the pin is right here. So measure from this edge to the center of the hole, and then you add 1/8 of an inch to get that point. So up here, that hole there turns out to be 5/8 plus 1/8 of an inch. So it's 3/4 of an inch over. And then you have to measure the depth from the center of the hinge pin hole right there and the top, and then you add 3/16 of an inch for this thickness to get the center of that hole. So once you have that, the center hole drilled, then you could mount this in the hole, take your screws out, and then basically use that as a template to drill the other 2 holes. Now, fortunately for me, and I mentioned this in another episode, I have some super long drills from a previous job. So what that allows you to do is go in with the air drill wherever it is. Not nearby, but anyways, you can go in with the long drills and you could drill them straight, because if you go in with a short drill, you tend to go in an angle like that. So if you have to do this, I suggest trying to get a hold of some of those long drills to drill the holes and get it in. But anyways, we've got them all. They're all set in place. These holes are countersunk so that these tapered screws, these beveled screws, will fit into the hole flush. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to drill a couple holes in this to basically simulate where I'm going to spot weld it. I'll snap that in place and then we'll get the hinge pins in. And there's the upper drip rail installed in the International Roadster. I have the pins in place and everything screwed and ready to go on both sides there. Have basically done my little welds there and dressed them up, and then along the back. So it's all in place kind of like the way it would have been, or very close to it. Next up, there is a lower drip rail that goes along the bottom here of the deck lid. I've got it over here on the bench. Now, I made a bunch of these up when I did the 5-window coupe. I've got to go over this with a wire wheel and clean this all up because it's got a little bit of basically flash rust onto it. And then there's another piece I've got to make, which is a little angled piece that basically this screws in here, and then that piece screws into those holes there. So it's kind of like a little sill that goes there that sits on top of. Anyways, I'm going to make that up, and then I'll show you putting that in, and hopefully we'll get the deck lid in, opening and shutting, and kind of get the deck lid portion of the International Roadster going here. So here's a support piece I was talking about that I need to make up. It's basically a right angle piece of 18 gauge sheet metal, 7/8 by 7/8 each side. And there's a number of screws drilled down along the side. There's a little notch here. Now where that goes, I'm going to try and position it. It goes right there. Hopefully I don't have the camera lady, but that little notch fits over the reveal on the bottom of the support, and then it's going to screw into these holes here along here, and then we're going to put that drip edge on top of it. So wait and see. We'll be right there in a second. There is the lower drip rail installed. There's a screw that goes right there, and the drip rail supports on both sides. And then there's a couple screws down in the bottom that hold it in place up against that little support that I made. Now, in the future, we'll be putting a trunk latcher that'll sit right about there. That'll also will screw down into that and hold it in place. There is one other screw that goes here and obviously on the other side to go in there, but for now we've got the lower drip rail in place, and I'm going to start fitting the deck lid back on. I think it should fit just fine. I've doubled my measurements. I've checked it on the other Roadster and should be good to go, but let's see how it fits. Now I've got the deck lid installed on the International Roadster. It fits quite well. Most of the places I've got a pretty decent gap along the top here. Now, one thing I mentioned is that the holes in the inside of them are slightly oversized. May have to address those by putting new adjusters in. And I think there's a little bit of a warp to it too. As you can see, like there's some pretty big dents and stuff into it. So it's more than possible that I'm going to have to do some massage work on the deck lid itself to get the fit the rest of the way, or at least do that before I do anything else. Otherwise, it goes up no problem. And see, there's the hinge pins there. Everything's good and welded into place. And then over here, I've been working on the tie rod for Brenda's Roadster. We got some ball joints in. I tapped a piece of DOM steel rod, and we have the front. We've got the tie rod on there, and I've done a quick alignment on it. So if you watch some of my other videos about chassis work, I mean, essentially what you do is stick like 2 steel rods, something straight on both sides of the rotors there, and then basically take a measurement between there and there at the back, and then across the front, is from here until my little marker mark there, because you want them to be in equal distance, and make sure that the rods are in equal distance. I probably should cut that off. I've used it enough times, but what you want is a 1/16 of an inch toe in on the front versus the back measurement. So we've got that right now, so we're good to go. So I'm going to leave that tie rod on. I will probably go to work on the arm that goes to the steering box here shortly. Not sure if I'll include it on this video or not, but we're getting close to cutoff time for the video, so we'll see what else we can do. So I've been busy in the past week, kind of jumping around between all 3 different projects, working a little on this, a little on that. On the Camera Lady's Roadster, we get the dash all put in, we got the holes cut for the gauges, so I know that the ignition switch fits, and we've got it all welded in, and the new steering drops on it. Over on Brenda's Roadster, we did a little bit of work there. We've got the tie rod in and the steering arm in, and we finally got working on the International Roadster, putting the upper drip rail in and then the lower drip rail pieces in. I've fitted the decklid in. I thought that it kind of fitted okay, but it actually doesn't. It's looking more and more like it's twisted. Also, there's some significant rust damage along the bottom. What I'm probably going to do on an upcoming episode is I'm going to try fitting our decklid, or the Camera Lady's decklid, in here to make sure that it's not the body. I don't think it is. I think it's really the decklid, because you can actually see damage to it. So I do have another inner decklid that potentially we can use for it. And then the owner is open possibly to getting a new skin. But we've got to do some investigational work on this to see if I can repair it, or if we're going to have to go an alternate route. But anyways, made progress on this. We still have some more work to go. The ultimate goal on both of these bodies is that in the next, I don't want to put a timeline onto it, but soon I got to get both of these bodies cleaned down to bare metal and into epoxy primer. But before that, we've got to finish off some small stuff. So next week's episode, we'll carry on with basically the same thing, trying to move these 2 bodies to the point where I can put epoxy primer on it, and then picking away on Brenda's Roadster there as we get more parts in. So anyways, that's it for this week's video. Please like, share, tag, and subscribe. Send me your comments, and I'll see you next week. Everybody have a great weekend.